Hello there. I'm Theodore Pawncroft, brother of the legendary multi-award-winning audiobook narrator Ed Pawncroft. You may be wondering what has happened to my dear brother Edward. Well, about a month ago, Ed contracted the still prevalent coronavirus, and after complications with an existing condition, had to undergo major larynx and tracheotic surgery. But rest assured, Ed is well on the road to recovery, and has retired to the Canary Islands, where he now lives with his wife Petunia and his 2 dogs, Dennis and Diglett. To continue the story of Milton's adventure, I will be taking over from him for the foreseeable future. Luckily, just like my younger brother, I too am known for my
spot-on impression of Milton Oliver. Oh yeah!
Ooh. So, without any further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Milton's Adventure, a Milton story. Narrated by me, Ted Pawncroft. Chapter 9. Showdown in downtown Scunthorpe.
Featuring the likes of Big Potato, Barry Podmore, and Chet Banally.
A steady torrent of piping hot water splashed down onto Milton's bare head and shoulders, ridding him of the filth, both literal and emotional, which had burdened him for months. He grinned as clumps of dirt and lint flaked off and disappeared from sight down the plug hole at his feet. This was the first shower he'd had in a while, and by gum he was going to make it worth it. His first morning back at home in some time had been spent in luxury thus far. A quick toss to some footsie videos on his trusty old PC, and a long overdue shit while playing Mario and Yoshi on his Game Boy Color, all while the delightful aromas of his father's cooking wafted up the staircase. This was the life he'd so missed. Milton stepped out of the bath-cum-shower and towelled himself off briskly. While he did so, he caught a quick glimpse of himself in the small mirror above the sink.
Oh, what the fuck?
He cried in horror, noticing numerous pustulous yellow boils dotted round his forehead and cheeks that looked like they were full to burst any second. Milton touched at one of the engorged carbuncles in alarm. It felt a bit like touching giant bubble wrap or the underside of a limpet.
Dad!
Shouted Milton, not daring to squeeze one of the big yellow spots.
What's on my face?
A muffled response came from the kitchen downstairs.
What, Milton? I can't hear you over all these eggs frying.
Milton piled naked out through the bathroom door and rushed across the landing to his bedroom, wherein he threw on a pair of red H&M boxers, some heavily distressed black jeans, and a My Chemical Romance t-shirt he'd stolen from Damaged Society a few years back. He then scampered down the stairs while pulling on some odd socks that were strewn randomly on the carpet.
Milton, what's gotten into you? We'll get noise complaints,
said Jamie as Milton dashed into the dining room and clattered into the big wooden table, upon which was laid the house's best plates and cutlery. His father, Jamie Oliver, stood flipping an omelette in one of his legendary Tefal anodized non-stick frying pans.
Dad! Why am I covered in yellow spots?
Jamie turned and squinted at Milton.
What? Oh, that's a symptom of space transmutation sickness. Ha ha! You've got the yellow nodes.
Milton touched at his face in fear.
Yellow nodes? Oh, God. Am I going to die?
Jamie plated up the last omelette with a dexterous flourish of his spatula.
No, don't be silly. It's one of the side effects from repetitive dimensional travel. They'll go away in a few days, I think.
Jamie chuckled as he turned the hob off.
Stu got them pretty bad once. His wife wouldn't let him in the house.
Milton sat disgruntledly down at the table as his father passed breakfast to him. A folded yellow omelette, topped with halved tomatoes, shredded tarragon, and a light dusting of chopped chives.
It's your favourite Mountainese monkey omelette, minus the monkey and the mountain.
Jamie laughed at the old family in-joke, which was, in fact, lifted from an old Pakistanese proverb. He who seeks the Mountainese monkeys is more likely to cook an omelette without eggs. Milton picked at the delicious breakfast glumly. He felt rather queer, like he wanted to go back to sleep forever, but also like he never wanted to sleep again. Jamie grinded a copious dusting of pepper onto his egg dish and struck up a conversation.
So you went to the meat realm, eh? Interesting place, huh? I used to get all my beef from there until they got all tight on border security.
Milton prodded a tomato with his fork.
Yeah, I'll bet. How did you find me?
Jamie spoke through mouthfuls of egg.
Well, basically, Hugh sensed a sudden spike of concentrated Kragian energy, and when me and him and some of the other chefs got there was like a big zombie apocalypse going on. We managed to stop the infection from spreading to the city. Then we found you in a pond after days of searching. You'd had quite a nasty fall. Your familiar must have saved your life.
Oh God, a zombie apocalypse? What was that all about?
Jamie finished off his omelette and wiped his mouth with his sleeve.
Well, the demon that you destroyed was a Kragian comet, carrying what's known as the Kravid virus, or the Green Fog. It is a powerful ancient chemical bioweapon that first saw use during the Bodescalia Wars, a literal agent of annihilation. They'd be dropped down from the sky and make people turn all angry and green. I think it's a similar type of sorcery to the Bodescalia trees with using hosts and all that. The one you destroyed was lost between the dimensions for ages, but it must have eventually landed in that meat-rimmed mountain and started causing all that havoc. Sheer luck that you happened to be there. Who knows what would have happened if you weren't? Anyway, it's gone now. Oh, that reminds me.
Jamie fumbled around in his pockets and pulled out the ever-crumpled list of demons.
Found this in your pocket in the pond? Your little spaceman spiff jumpsuit thing was ruined, and we had to chuck it. But luckily this pucker parchment was imbued with waterproofing magic.
Jamie uncrumpled the little sheet of lined paper.
There it is, number 19. Kravid Green Fog Agent. We crossed it off for you.
Jamie handed the parchment to Milton, who hastily stuffed it into his jean pocket. Jamie continued.
I crossed Frijoles Grandes too. No idea how you killed that guy. He's one of Krog's main cronies from that one really weird grey planet. Very impressive.
Milton managed a small smile.
Thanks, Dad.
Jamie held up an accusatory finger.
But I'm not happy that you went off to Edgeburg here to slack off, okay? Even though that's where you found frijoles, you shouldn't have done that. It's cheap food and it's not good for you, alright?
Milton hung his head.
Sorry, Dad.
Jamie continued, stacking his cutlery onto his plate and taking it to the sink.
I'm also very annoyed at that Death Corp agency. Fat lot of good that Zab Elark was. Got you on the ICER's watch list. That's the last time I listened to Gordon for babysitting suggestions.
Hey, Zab was a pretty cool guy.
Protested Milton. Jamie turned.
Don't talk back to me, young man. I may not show it, but I'm fuming, okay? This is the last straw. I would take the chalice off you this second if you weren't doing such a good job of killing the demons.
Milton watched as Jamie quickly washed up his plate.
Right, so, here's what we're gonna do.
Jamie picked up the bird, which had been placed atop the microwave.
I've installed a tracking device onto your familiar, which administers a small electric shock when you deviate from your objective. So once you choose a demon, you'll have to stick to it, okay? And no going off and cramming your face with fast food.
Milton frowned and nodded grumpily.
Fine.
Because of your current predicament, it will also buzz when in the presence of the ICER or any affiliated organisations. And I've installed telephonic capabilities so I can transmit my voice through the bird and provide assistance if needs be.
Jamie walked to the table and placed the bird in front of Milton.
Seems like it's just a baby monitor now,
grumbled Milton, putting the bird into his other pocket and pushing his half-eaten omelette aside.
Well, a baby monitor for a big baby. Stick to the rules and make me proud, and maybe I'll take it off, okay? Oh yeah, have you read that letter from your Uncle Barry Podmore?
Milton shook his head.
Well, go and open it. It might be important.
Milton walked sulkily upstairs, mumbling under his breath.
Barry was a better father than you ever were.
Hey, I heard that. I brought you this house, didn't I? I cooked you good, healthy dinners.
Milton pushed open his bedroom door and picked up the letter that lay on his desk amongst the hardened nut rags and unpainted Warhammer figurines. He thumbed it open aggressively and unfolded the handwritten note that was inside.
Dear Milton, hope you are well. Just writing to let you know that something very bad has been going on here in Scunthorpe. Can't say much over letter. Train tickets and pocket money in blank envelope on wall opposite Kyle's house. Meet at local when you get here.
Milton rolled his eyes. It was another of his adoptive uncle's dead-drop-style letters. He would usually get one every month or so, which would allude to the location of a second package containing his pocket money. The contrived process was a remnant from Barry's time in the Scunthorpe Mafia, when the exchange of money and other goods had to be very covert. The habit had stuck, despite Milton's clear attempts at teaching his uncle how to use PayPal or make a simple bank transfer. As to the location of this month's cash wad, Kyle's house referred to Craig's house, being what Barry mistook his friend's name as. There was no telling why or how Barry had left the money there, but it was pointless to argue. Barry wasn't the type of man to listen. Milton made his way back downstairs with the letter in hand.
Barry's left me my pocket money and train tickets to Scunthorpe as another unmarked dead drop. He wants me to go all the way there for some reason.
Jamie, who was putting on his jacket, furrowed his brow.
Now I don't like that man, and he doesn't like me, but he looked after you when I couldn't, so I think you owe him this one. Also, I have a hunch about this one. I've got a feeling in my guts.
Milton looked down at the note in hand. Jamie's gut instincts were notoriously prophetic. His heart sank. It was a long and horrible journey to Scunthorpe, but his Uncle Barry rarely expressed any form of worry of any kind, so something must be up. Jamie moved out into the hall, producing a pucker pie from his jacket pocket.
All right, I'm going to head off to the Pucker realm. Got some important business to deal with. You better take that train, all right? I don't want to hear that you've been space transmutating, or you'll have a lot worse than yellow boils covering your face. Okay, bye.
Jamie promptly bit into the pie and disappeared from sight. Milton returned to his room and began to pack for the epic 5-hour journey that would see him change once in Sheffield. He hated this journey more than anything, and would have much preferred to just spacewalk there. Why did his superpower have to be stripped from him now of all times? Milton unzipped his brimming Attack on Titan backpack, which lay in his broken gaming swivel chair. He emptied out all the milk and food supplies he'd taken from Ed's Burger a fortnight or so ago, and popped off the cap to one of the cartons, taking a long whiff of what he thought would be soured lactose. To his surprise, the milk had no bad odour, and he went in for a taste. It was just as creamy and delicious as it had been when he'd first had it. Kudos to whatever space cow this magic milk came from. Milton polished off an entire carton of the white stuff while he packed his toothbrush, an extra pair of pants, and his green Game Boy Color to keep him entertained on the long journey. Also into the brimming rucksack went his Pacanese bayonet, an additional space milk in case he got thirsty, and last but certainly not least, the bloodstone chalice. Yet, as soon as Milton's hand made contact with the shining glass relic, it began to glow a bright orange and fill up slowly, having stored the absorbed power from the vanquishment of the Kragian comet. Milton was humbled. The little glass had waited 2 weeks for him. He quaffed the carbonated orange mixture and felt the weariness of his joints and muscles disappear altogether. Feeling refreshed, Milton slapped on his blue Airwalks, his faded red hoodie, and his trademark Union Jack cap. A hat that was in fact originally purchased by Barry from a gift shop when Milton had first been taken in by the Podmores, back when he had nowhere else to go. His uncle had come to expect to see Milton wearing the hat at all times, and Milton gladly obliged. Just when he'd turned the lights out and was about to leave the room, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in his PC monitor, which reminded him of how utterly vile he looked. He couldn't go outside looking like this. Off came the Union Jack cap, and on went the hooded black cloak he'd stolen from the Burnt End base, and a pair of counterfeit Roy Bomb sunglasses stolen from Craig. Milton considered his Attack on Titan backpack. If he wore it outside, it was almost guaranteed that a passing anime fan would take heed of it and strike up a conversation. He would normally delight in the exchange, but wouldn't be able to contend with the social interaction in a state like this. The bag would have to stay. After a few strenuous minutes of stuffing the bloodstone chalice and the red cap into a concealed pocket on the inside of the cape, Milton came to the conclusion that he'd be travelling very light, which meant no toothbrush, no spare pants, and certainly no Game Boy. Even his Pekingese bayonet would have to be left behind, which was probably a good thing anyway. If he was caught with that thing on a train, he'd be spending a lifetime in the slammer. Milton checked his appearance again in the monitor's reflection. His disguise was perfect. No one would suspect a thing. He looked wistfully around the room. It was time to leave home again. It was a sad affair, as Milton would have liked to have spent a lot more time back here, relaxing and chilling out. He hadn't even turned on his PC for a single gaming session. He closed his bedroom door and walked across the landing to the stairs, where his loyal house cat sat cleansing herself with her tongue. Milton bent down and addressed the black and white feline.
Hey, Smiggins, you gonna look after the house for me while I'm gone, yeah?
The cat mewed in response, and Milton tousled her head affectionately.
There's a good kitty.
As a matter of fact, Smiggins actually was going to look after the house while Milton was gone, for this was her function, being not a cat, but a Talestine sentinel from the deep mangroves of the Pucker realm, which Jamie had gifted to Milton alongside the house. While Milton was asleep or away, she would guard the house from any malicious intruders or otherworldly beings, inflicting great pain on those who crossed her. She could also survive without eating for long periods of time, and was fully house-trained. Such is the way of a Pekingese Talestine. Milton closed his front door behind him and sighed, touching at the flaking green paint on the woodwork. Who knew how long it would be before he was back here again? He pulled the cloak down over his disfigured face as he noticed his neighbour Kevin pottering around at his front garden. No one could see him like this, or they would surely know something was up. Milton began the long walk to his friend Craig's house to receive the pickup. As he walked down Gloucester Road, he passed many of his favourite shops that he wouldn't dare set foot in his current condition. Area 51, his favourite distributor of all things Warhammer and Magic the Gathering, Southern Fried Chicken Takeaway, his #1 supplier of hot greasy kebab meat, and lastly the mysterious Monkey Bar, with its familiar sounds of loud muffled bass and middle-aged daytime drinking. All the way, Milton got many funny looks as he shielded himself from view and ran very quickly past people to avoid their stares. He was a monster! At last, Milton arrived outside Craig's terraced abode in uptown Clifton. He turned a corner and marched forward, not daring to look up for fear that he would catch a glimpse of his beloved friend in the window. Oh, how he wanted to run up, knock on the door, and go in for a slice of Jamaican ginger cake and a few rounds of Smash Bros for the Wii, telling Craig all about his adventures. But he knew this would only serve as a distraction. If he looked up at what he was missing out on, there was no telling what he would do. No doubt Craig had been driven to insanity waiting for his return. Who knew what crazy conspiracies his pals had created about his whereabouts, having had no recollection of their previous adventure into Minecraft due to memory wipe at the hands of his father. Milton surged towards the high wall opposite the terrace, and, just as Barry had said, a white letter lay atop it. It was just above eye level of the common pedestrian, perhaps a little bit easy to intercept, but at least it wasn't crammed down the back of a grit bin in Stokes Croft like last time. Milton snatched it up before anyone else could get there first, briefly taking off his hood to properly inspect the envelope. This was from Barry, all right.
For Milton's eyes only,
was scrawled on the front. Why did he have to make things so elaborate all the time? Milton opened the letter and quickly saw what he wanted to see, a wad of banknotes as thick as you like and a couple of loose train tickets. He suddenly felt people's glares from across the road. He had been standing in one place for too long. People were beginning to notice. He turned on his heels and fled the scene. While he ran, the envelope slipped from his grasp and fluttered to the tarmac road below. Luckily, he had removed all the cash and tickets from it and stuffed them into his back pocket, or he would have had to have stopped and gone back. Milton could feel the searing eyes staring at his horrible yellow face, and he pulled the hood back over his unsightly visage as he ran to the nearest bus stop ahead, where he sat and waited as inconspicuous as possible. After 5 minutes or so, the bus pulled up and Milton boarded. He allowed himself a glance towards Craig's house. He couldn't be tempted now that he'd paid for the ride. He rubbed his eyes. Was that Craig he saw on the terrace, turning back and heading through his front door? Milton wondered if his friend had seen him picking up the letter, but it was too late now. The bus was driving quickly away for Temple Meads train station, where Milton would board his second mode of transportation and begin the next part of his odyssey. The train journey was a long and arduous one, and Milton found himself yearning for a few quick rounds of Mario and Yoshi on his Game Boy Color. But alas, he was forced to simply watch the scenery go by the train window. He saw the ripe green pastures of Middle England passing by, hedgerows and orchards, streams and marshes. The summer skies were clear and blue, and he felt a great sense of national pride. Now this was scenery. No stupid woolly birds or mad naked giants anywhere in sight. After a stop at Burton-on-Trent, an enormously fat man took the seat next to Milton, pressing him right against the edge of the carriage, and did not get off for many stops. Nothing else of interest happened after that, and Milton made the change at Sheffield, then snoozed for a bit until he was awoken by the smell of industrial steelworks. At last he had reached his destination, Scunthorpe. It was around tea time when Milton alighted the train, and he found himself wishing he'd eaten all of Jamie's omelette. That would have really set him up for the day. He dined on a Ginster's pasty purchased from a pumpkin cafe across from the platform, with some of his riches. He sat down and counted the wad of banknotes as he consumed the meat-filled pastry. There had to be at least £1,000 in cash. This was no mistake. His Uncle Barry was very generous with his large fortune amassed from playing in Scunthorpe's #1 pub rock band, Baked Potato, and would delight in sending his nephew outrageous sums of money on a monthly basis. After finishing his flaky pick-me-up, Milton sauntered into Scunthorpe town centre, gazing around upon such classics as St. John's Church, the Foundry Shopping Centre, and King Kebab Takeaway, where Milton had first lain with the love of his life, a lovely black-haired lass by name of Minnie Cooper, who happened to work there at the time. He could afford to be a little more relaxed with shielding his face now, as he wouldn't look as out of place here as he did in Bristol, as it wasn't uncommon to see a horribly scarred or burnt steelworker with similar facial conditions in these parts. The town layout was not easily navigable, with its grey buildings and red brick pavement all blending into one monotonous blur, but luckily Milton knew this place like the back of his hand, from his formative years spent roaming the town's many back alleys and car parks. A few shortcuts down some back streets here and there, and Milton was well on his way towards the Concrete Anchor, Barry Podmore's local watering hole and their traditional rendezvous spot, which stood proudly on the edge of town on what used to be the main high street in a bygone era. Milton came out of a dark lane and onto the street he knew so well. The Podmore's old house had once been here, before it was bulldozed to the ground to make way for a Londis. He passed the local Betfreds, the local Ladbrokes, and the local Weatherspoons, another of his uncle's classic haunts, but only on Sundays for a fried lunch, or when the Anchor was closed for fumigation. At last Milton came to a lovely quaint little pub, sandwiched snugly between two residential properties. The brick walls were coated with trimmed ivy, and the two front bay windows showed a cosily dim-lit scene, many men and women drinking happily with full pints in clean glasses, all with wide smiles of revelry on their faces. This meant that Barry's pub was close by. Milton walked past the well-kept Dog and Ball and set eyes upon the familiar sight of the Concrete Anchor, which lived up to its name by being composed solely of concrete, with one greasy window in the front that showcased scenes of dismal gloom and loneliness within. This public house was likewise once snugly sandwiched between two buildings, until they were knocked down to make way for another Londis that never appeared, after the locals held numerous riots and protests, leaving two empty lots on either side, often used as secondary toilets if you're brave enough to climb through the rubble. Above Milton's head was a hanging sign, which used to house a picture of a boat's weighing anchor. The last time Milton had seen that, it was hanging above the Podmore's family mantelpiece. Now, in its empty frame, was the name of the pub roughly scrawled on in Ronseal fence-life. Milton pushed open the heavy iron door, which looked to be relatively new. Not a surprise, as the Anchor would often have to replace its entrance once or twice a year, after brawls or the annual kick-the-front-door-in contest held by Barry and Co. The heady musk of hops and working men hit Milton's nose as he went in, a most nostalgic smell, as he had indeed once worked here as a young lad, pulling pints when nowhere else would have him. This was in fact how he had first met his uncle-to-be back in the day. Milton passed an elderly man with squinty little eyes who scowled at him, clutching a dirty pint-glass half filled with a flat brown ale.
"All right, Trevor?"
smiled Milton, nodding to the local patron, a customer since its founding some 60 years prior. Legend has it that Trevor had entered and bought a drink before all of the chairs and tables had even arrived. Milton took down his hood. The light in here was so dim that there was no chance anyone would see his boils. Plus, they were probably too drunk or blind to see anyway. The place was unchanged since he'd last been here. The same wonky water-damaged paintings, the same pool table with no balls or cues or legs, and there at the back, the booth where Barry could almost always be found, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Milton quickly slipped on his Union Jack cap on approach. His uncle would be truly heartbroken to see him without it. Milton passed in front of the booth and saw the welcoming grins of his uncle, Barry Podmore, a short man of stocky disposition, clad in a greasy flannel shirt with an award-winning golden smile, and his lifelong friend and bandmate, Chet Banally, a very tall man who sat stoically holding his pint and wearing his classic grey tuxedo. Milton opened his mouth to greet the men, but within seconds a wall of sound hit him.
Hello and welcome, and how do you do? Here comes my nephew, it's so good to see you. We have been drinking, just sitting right here. Pints we've been sinking, no cider, just beer.
Uncle Barry! Uncle Chet! Oh, it's so good to see you!
Milton smiled widely in appreciation of the welcoming ballad. Barry and Chet would often break into song at random, and it was considered an honour if one was performed in your presence. Barry stood up, sending a splash of lager across the table as his hairy gut impacted the pint glass.
Milts, look at you! You're all grown up!
He came to embrace his once-adopted son, exuding a scent of cigarettes, right guard total defence, and Marmite.
Still wearing my hat too!
Chet nodded courteously, taking a sip of his drink.
All right, Milton?
Barry held Milton's shoulders in his big hairy hands.
You've lost pounds! You're thin as stick! That's not the Podmore way! I shall beat you into the ground where you stand!
There was a moment of awkward silence as Barry stared angrily into Milton's eyes, then erupted into laughter.
Ah! Just kidding.
He elbowed Milton in the ribs a few times. Clearly he and Chet had been drinking since the early hours of the morning.
Maybe you could teach your uncle some dieting tips, eh? I'm back in the game now since your Aunt Nat died. Gotta look good for the ladies. You know what I mean?
Barry laughed again, sitting back down in the booth and kindly moving up so that Milton could fit.
You! Another round of drinks and some pork scratchings!
Shrieked Barry to the bartender, a meek gentleman who watched behind the relative safety of the bar. This was not a member of staff that Milton recognised, and he wondered if his old boss, Kent Liveridge, still worked here, or whether he had been driven out by Barry and Chet's relentless escapades, or perished after his long battle with SARS.
So, Mills, how's the pocket money treating you, eh?
Barry leaned over and impulsively tugged on Milton's ear for little to no reason. Milton nodded.
Very good, Uncle Barry. Thanks for that, by the way.
Barry shook his head and drained the dregs of his mug, which Milton could have sworn was full not seconds ago.
So, what have you been up to, eh? Got a girlfriend? Still making online videos with that little shit friend of yours, Kyle?
Yeah, no on the girlfriend, Uncle Barry, but yes on the videos.
Barry patted his chest.
Well, I've got a girlfriend. Oh yes, my first flame since Nat died. I enjoyed the bachelor life while it lasted, but my new lass... well, let's just say she's quite a little number indeed.
Chet swigged at his pint.
Quite the opposite to old Natalie, eh?
Barry turned around suddenly, his face reddened.
Well, what does that mean, Chet?
Chet smiled coyly.
Well, Nat was hardly a model, was she?
Barry made a swing at Chet, which landed against the stained upholstery of the booth as Chet avoided the attack.
I'll have you know Natalie was Miss Scunthorpe 1990 and 1991.
Chet laughed.
Yeah, and she couldn't even walk to the contest the following year.
Barry pointed a stubby finger at his friend.
Listen, do you know what BBW stands for, Chet?
Balloon-bodied whore,
barked Chet in response.
No!
Cried Barry, outraged.
I shall beat you through the wall if I weren't so fucking drunk. It stands for Big Beautiful Woman, which is what Nat was. Anyway, she's dead.
Barry took a long, mournful sip of his pint, and then turned back to Milton, grinning.
So, Milton, how's that big bastard chef of a father treating you?
Milton adjusted his cap.
Yeah, not too bad. I'm just living in the house he bought me in Bristol. He's got me doing these little chores for him.
Barry took a sip from Chet's drink.
Oh yeah? Like what sort of thing?
Milton suddenly felt a sharp buzz from his leg pocket, which shocked him.
Ow! Fuck!
His father must have also placed some kind of monitor on the bird that detected when he was going to reveal things that he shouldn't. Neither Chet nor Barry seemed to notice, so he continued.
Yeah, just keeping on. How's things with the band? Is that all going well?
Barry grinned toothily and turned to Chet, laughing.
Yeah, that's all good. Got a gig tonight at 9 at the Lincoln Imp. Gonna be huge! The whole town's gonna be there. Isn't that right, Grit?
Barry called out to a dishevelled man sitting alone in the next booth over, who responded in a deep, slurred voice.
Yeah, mate.
Barry laughed.
That's Grit, our new drummer. He used to drum for Spithead back in the 70s. Great guy, and he can drink you under the table too if you really get him going.
Speaking of, interjected Chet, as the barman approached with a warped metal tray and unloaded 6 foaming mugs of Hram, Scunthorpe's finest local craft ale, said to get you fucked up for well under 10 quid. In fact, it was rumoured that a single sip would keep you inebriated for up to 24 hours and half your sperm count. Barry and Chet accepted the pints with fervour, pushing 2 in the direction of Milton. The bartender cum waiter spoke up with a shaking voice.
Can I see some ID for the young lad?
Barry looked up from his own 2 drinks with a beady glare that seemed to bore into the young man's soul. The bartender looked meekly at the floor. Barry turned to Milton.
Did you hear that? I thought I heard something.
Milton barely had time to respond before Barry had hurled both of his pints, glass and all, at the man, covering him in frothy lager and sending shards of glass crashing around the pub. Barry and Chet stood and immediately broke into an energetic song, much to the amusement of Milton and the other patrons, who clapped along in glee.
Glass in his eyes! Glass in his eyes! This little loser!
Punch him at the boozer!
No one even cares if he fucking dies! Pints on the floor! Pints on the floor! My suggestion?
No stupid question!
Keep lips sealed till evermore! So don't you ever be asking a fucking stupid question like that again! Anyone who sits at the baked potato captain's table is to be treated with respect!
Barry slammed his finger down on the wood of the table, causing a chip to fly off. Milton grinned, remembering back to the similar circumstances under which he had first met Barry and Chet, and the pranks they would pull on him, like flooding the toilets with muck, or breaking in and smashing all the glasses hours before the pub even opened up. The sodden bartender apologised, and agreed to pour another 2 drinks, as well as make all the other drinks on the house. Milton took a sip of the brew. It was yeasty and hoppy, with the distinctive metallic undertones of the brewing process, which was reported to take place in a disused ironworks on the far borders of Lincolnshire. Barry burst into a pack of the complimentary pork scratchings and began to eat them after dipping each one into his pint first.
Right, so, now that the drinks are here, it's time to get down to it. You may be wondering why I've summoned you here today, Milton.
Milton nodded.
Oh yes, Uncle Barry. You said something very bad was going on?
Barry crunched down hard on a rind.
Yes, that's right. Very bad indeed.
Milton took another sip and leaned forward.
Well, what's happened?
Barry paused for effect, then spoke.
I've been having very bad dreams.
Chet rolled his eyes.
Oh, for fuck's sake, not this again. Is this that thing about eating bacon in the morning?
Barry turned in fury.
No, Chet! I haven't finished speaking, for goodness sake. Let a man finish.
Barry turned back to Milton.
So, I've been having the same bad dream every night for the past week. You know what that means when I have a bad dream, don't you?
Milton nodded.
It means it will come true. Like when you dreamt about Aunt Natalie dying every day for a year and then one day she just popped off like that.
Milton snapped his fingers and instantly threw up beer and pasty fragments all across the table.
Mills, what the fuck?
Cried Barry, lifting his pint up as the chunky bile spread across the surface.
I thought you could keep it down. You used to be a world-class Hram drinker.
Milton shook his head between retches. Evidently, he had forgotten to deactivate the stomach-wiping setting he'd put on the bird during the belt-busting burger challenge, and something had gone very, very wrong. He patted his chest daintily a few times, feeling an intense acid reflux.
No, I just haven't eaten all day. Got bad stomach.
Milton subtly commanded the power to cease, as Barry brusquely commanded the bartender to come over and wipe up the sorry mess. There was no cloth to hand, so the poor man had to use his jumper. After the table was clear, Barry continued recounting his dream.
Right, so, yes, my dreams basically always come true, as you say. And for the past week, I've been dreaming about one specific place.
Milton took a big swig of his beer, wanting to make up for what he'd lost.
Where's that?
None other than Maltby Main Colliery,
replied Barry dramatically.
No!
Gasped Milton. For this was the very place that, years prior, he had been canoodling with his girlfriend Minnie from the kebab shop, and she had fallen to the pits below in a freak accident.
Why on earth have you been dreaming of that horrid place?
Don't you remember? That's where we dumped Paul's body.
Milton thought back to that fateful day in his head. Minnie's father, Paul Cooper, who was in fact the head of the very same coal mine, had never taken much of a liking to Milton, who would often snicker about his abnormally large, spherical, bald head behind his back. To make matters worse, the horrific accident in which his teenage daughter perished had in fact been caused by the angry shouts of Paul as he discovered her engaging in acts of fancy with the young Milton, who was no older than 9 at the time. She had fallen 100 feet from the ledge they were copulating upon, down the cliffs and into the giant heap of coals below, where she was impaled on rusty machinery and died instantly. Paul took it to heart and chased Milton for many days before he eventually came to the very pub that they sat in now, where he met his end at the hands of Barry and Chet, who teamed up with Milton and ended up brutally killing the man and dumping his body back down into the very mine he had toiled in for years. This had in fact been Milton's first confirmed kill, performed after being bestowed with a fine curved blade from Barry, Captain Milton's blade, which was somewhere under the sofa at home.
Yeah, I remember. I slit his throat.
Barry swallowed and looked around, signs of fright visible on his face, an uncommon occurrence.
Well, I had a dream about it, and I heard a whispering voice coming from the old abandoned mine. It was telling me to go there. So I woke up and got in my Skoda and drove all the way there. It was like 4 a.m. or something. Had to stop for petrol in a Ginsters at Texaco. But eventually I got there, and as I heaved open the gates, something flew straight out at me. A lump of coal. First I thought it was kids mucking about, but then another one came out and hit me right on head. I was fuming. So I went in swinging, but I heard a loud bang, and I saw a sight I won't soon forget.
Milton was open-mouthed.
What? Flying coal, like a swarm of deadly bees coming straight for me. And I heard a voice too. It said, "Barry Podmore, curse you." So I ran out there with me tail between me legs. Never been scared before in me life until then. Had to write you a letter. I thought you'd want to know on account of it being that mine and all.
Barry shakily took a swig of ram. Chet snorted.
That is the gayest shit I've ever heard. Sounds like the whole thing was just a bad dream. You've probably been eating bacon again, I'll bet.
Barry slammed his pint down on the table.
No! I was really there! I woke up in bed next day and I had coal smudges all over my face. Look!
Barry got out his Nokia flip phone and brought up a blurred JPEG of his face covered in ominous black stains.
Could be anything. Probably went to bed eating licorice again,
denounced Chet. Milton was deep in thought. He thought back to what his father had said that morning about Barry's plight being of a serious nature.
He's telling the truth, Chet. I fear that there's some great evil lurking within the old mine.
Barry and Milton continued to ruminate on the intricacies of what Barry had seen while they finished their drinks. They concluded that the best thing to do would be to head back to Barry's house to gear up, then drive to Maltby, Maine, and go and stake it out properly while it was still light. Then they could just make it back to central Scunthorpe for the gig at 9. Barry clapped his hands and stood up.
Right, let's get back home. I'm starving. I've not eaten a thing all day except a couple of Bombay bad boys.
Chet sent his pint glass rolling across the floor, sending the bartender skipping off after it.
Hey, Milts, maybe you could do us one of your special fry-ups with all the trimmings, eggs, beans, and the rest.
Barry checked his pocket watch.
Yep, it's 7 on the dot. I can officially eat bacon.
Milton agreed and followed the 2 men out of the Anchor, passing the flustered bartender and giving a quick salute to Trevor, who was still scowling and drooling. They stepped out into the golden evening light, which couldn't make it through the pub window because of the billboard for Sky Sports across the road that blotted out the sun's rays perfectly. Barry squinted at Milton.
Hold on there, Milts. What are all those great fat spots on your face? Puberty finally hit, eh?
He laughed, swatting at Milton. Milton blushed and pulled his hood over his face. His drunken revelry in the Anchor had made him forget about his horrid deformities. When would his curse be lifted? For now, he would continue to wear the hood and the sunglasses. After passing the dog and ball and making obscene gestures through the window, the 3 came to Barry's ride parked up on the curb, the legendary bullet grey Skoda, an automobile which had become renowned in the Scunthorpe area for being the only vehicle permitted to go above the town centre speed limit via a loophole that Barry had invented. Barry unlocked the lustrous metallic chariot and opened the back door for Milton. Milton was taken aback.
Oh, wait, Uncle Barry, you're not going to drive, are you? You've been out there drinking all day. What if we crash?
Barry and Chet laughed in sync, and Barry staggered into the driver's seat.
I'll not crash, Milts. I've only had a few dozen. Besides, I could drive this thing with both eyes closed and my hands tied behind me back.
I've seen him do it,
vouched Chet, hopping into the passenger seat and removing 2 cans of Super X lager from the glove box, handing one to Barry and cracking open the other. He turned back to Milton, who was trying to find his seatbelt.
You want one, Milton?
No thanks, Chet. I think I've had enough already,
replied Milton.
Where's my seatbelt?
Took him out.
Responded Barry, turning on the ignition and aggressively tugging the gear stick into first.
Didn't need him.
The engine roared and the bullet grey machine took off from its parking spot, grazing the vehicle in front and making just about as much noise as a car possibly can.
Right, Milton, you may want to hold on to something. I'm going into 6th.
Barry shunted the gear stick again, and the car shuddered and zipped off up the high street, through 2 red lights and over a zebra crossing in front of a primary school. Milton looked out at the buildings whizzing past. As he did so, Barry and Chet broke out into song once more.
Bullet grey, around the way. Life's a breeze when you're sat in the front seat. Bullet grey, what's left to say? Into 3rd as I cruise down the high street.
The bullet grey Skoda weaved in and out of traffic, steered expertly by Barry even though he couldn't remember what day it was and kept forgetting that Milton was in the back. Eventually the buildings grew more and more scattered, and it became clear that they were on the very outskirts of Scunthorpe town, near the endless sprawling farmland and steelworks factories.
Uncle Barry, where are we going?
Inquired Milton as they passed a grassy mound with a ruined mill atop it, none other than Barry and Chet's favourite adolescent hangout, Claxby Hill.
Hey, hey!
Grinned Barry, swerving to avoid a wild heron.
Milton hasn't been to the ranch yet, has he? Last time you came out, we were still a fat family living in that shit little semi-detached.
Milton sat up.
You mean you finally bought Rancho del Podmore?
Barry nodded.
That's right. Finally had enough with the money I saved after Nat died. Didn't have to keep buying Kipling's cakes and the like.
It's a great place, and it's got the recording studio we've always dreamed of,
said Chet.
It's in a giant silo out back. Best acoustics in the whole of the East Midlands.
Are you living there too, Chet?
Asked Milton. Chet swigged from his can.
No, I can't leave the bungalow, or my fungus will die.
Milton shuddered, remembering back to his brief time spent living with Chet in his 1-bedroom bungalow, nicknamed the Fungalow because of Chet's unhealthy obsession with the cultivation of mould and rot. Milton had barely stayed there for a week and still contracted a cough and a sore throat that lasted him over a year.
What about Pete?
Asked Milton, as he was rather fond of Barry's own son, who was only a few years older than him. When Milton had lived alongside the Podmores, he and Peter would often take a bus to Cleethorpes Sands and throw people's hats off the pier for fun and larks. Barry looked mournfully out of the window.
No, Pete's gone off to university. He finally stood up to me and beat me up for feeding him all that fatty food when he was a kid.
Chet cut in.
Yeah, he's 6'2" and built like a brick, mind. He had Barry out cold on the floor for an hour.
All right. He's just taking after his dad. He's studying applied mechanics at the Grimsby Institute. Hopefully he can mend the tater-tot tour bus.
Chuckled Barry.
Didn't you drive that thing into a weir?
Recalled Milton.
Yeah, I did.
Beamed Barry.
Ah, look, we're here.
The Skoda came to an abrupt halt outside of a great metal gate amidst a tall hedgerow. The initials BP were incorporated into the gate's ornate framework.
Here we are, Rancho del Podmore,
said Barry jubilantly. The car moved slowly up the crunchy gravel path through the gates, which opened as they drove through. Milton gazed around in awe as the surroundings opened out into a great field dotted with hay bales and grazing sheep.
Ignore all the livestock and the hay. I haven't found time to get rid of them yet,
said Barry. Milton looked to the horizon to see a large barn that had been converted into a very grand dwelling indeed, with magnificent glass windows that looked out onto all sides, solar panels on the roof, and a big courtyard with apple trees and a lovely big pond.
We're trying to get it on grand designs, but I had a fist fight with Kevin MacLeod,
remarked Barry.
This place is awesome,
proclaimed Milton as the Skoda backed into a large garage to the right of the barn, which housed Barry's other bullet grey Skodas and the rusted and warped remains of the tater-tot tour bus, once a minibus shaped like a potato, now a mess shaped like a ruin. Once inside the barn, Barry gave Milton a tour of everything the place had to offer, including its 4 bathrooms, indoor hot tub, and rooms solely dedicated to his pet sugar gliders, an indoor forested habitat filled with dozens of the little winged marsupials that Barry had always had a soft spot for. His previous pair of gliders, Paul and Steve, had allegedly perished when they fell down the back of a radiator in the old house. And now that he had the money and space, Barry could finally live his dream of becoming a Class A sugar glider breeder. After all this had been explained, Barry led Milton to the kitchen, which also served as a bar, but was actually more like a replica of the concrete anchor, but inside Barry's home. Barry stood grinning behind the bar.
Can I get you anything, Milton? A bottle of Texas Thunder? How about a few shots of Pelican House Gold rum? It'll wipe your ass clean.
Barry popped the top off a small bottle and inhaled deeply as Chet got himself a can and sat down on a leather sofa next to a small woman of Asian origin who was wearing a baked potato band t-shirt, which was many sizes too big for her.
Oh yes, Milton. Here's my girlfriend, So Young. She's Korean, I think. Say ni hao, So Young.
Milton tipped his cap to the tiny Asian girlfriend, who smiled in response and greeted him in her own tongue.
만나세요, 반갑습니다.
Milton looked sideways at Barry awkwardly.
Yeah, sure.
Barry took a swig of the rum and bashed at the bar top.
Right, let's have that fry up then, and go to the silo and get our instruments and a few weapons, then we'll head out to the old mine. Sound good? Good.
Milton immediately went about preparing a great full English. Barry and Chet would often request meals from him whenever he stayed, knowing full well that he was the son of the legendary restaurateur Jamie Oliver. Milton didn't mind, however, as anything would impress them after years of destroying their taste buds with alcohol and cigarettes. Milton probably could have served up a plate of cotton wool with battery acid poured all over it, and they probably would have asked for seconds. As Milton plated up the last serving of mushrooms, Barry and Chet started to rhythmically bash their cutlery on the table they sat around, singing a chant of hunger.
I wanna have dinner now, and you're gonna serve me first class chow. Come on now, baby, 'cause you know that you'll feed me, so just pass me the fucking food, 'cause I am just so fucking hungry.
Here you go!
Announced Milton, presenting the 4 plates of food.
A Milton Oliver classic fry-up, with all the trimmings. Pure pork sausages, extra large chicken eggs, halved beef tomatoes, roasted button mushrooms, fried whole wheat toast, twice baked beans, blackened pudding, and
Milton paused for effect.
bacon. In the evening, just how you like it.
Barry licked his lips, tucking his polo shirt under his belt.
This looks great, Milts.
Milton sat down next to So Young and got to work on his own chef's portion, being slightly larger with an extra sausage.
So, how come you can't eat bacon in the morning, Uncle Barry?
It clogs me arteries up. Much better if I eat it around this time.
Answered Barry through a mouthful of hot egg. Chet dismissed the claim.
Bullshit. It's all in his head.
After the big breakfast had been fully consumed, Milton went about doing the washing up, as was tradition. He then accompanied Barry and Chet out the back of the barn and across the field towards a great concrete silo in the northeast corner of the field.
This is where the magic happens,
said Barry, pushing open a door that had been constructed at the base of the disused grain container. The interior of the giant cylinder was rustic and dimly lit, with much of the original corn-sifting apparatus still intact. There were mixing desks and hi-fi speaker systems that were all curved, so they fit perfectly around the curvature of the silo. At the far side, there was a soundproof recording booth, which looked to be currently in use.
Oh, for fuck's sake, he's blacked out in the booth again,
grunted Chet, opening up the door to the tiny square room. The second he did so, a cascade of empty Stella Artois cans surged out, along with the limp body of a man clad in a red hoodie, cyberpunk visor sunglasses, and Adidas tracksuit bottoms. Barry kicked at the man's head to stir him.
Wake up, you fucking disgrace!
Who is this guy?
Asked Milton, confused as to why there was a chav lying blotto on the studio floor.
He's a collaborator of ours who goes by the name DJ Tiddster. He had a big hit last year with his classic banger, I Want to Fly Like a Bird Does in the Sky, which was played in all the clubs in Scunthorpe on repeat for months. Me and Chet saw his live set when we went to beat local kids up. He was on stage just really giving it some. Very inspiring.
Chet continued.
We really needed something to spice up a song we'd been working on. Maybe add in a bit of hip-hop, a bit of rap as it's known. So we asked him to come and record some beats and a few lines for us, but he clearly took a few lines to heart. He smacked out on sniff constantly.
Barry kicked the DJ's head once again.
He's been in here for over a week now and hasn't got anything done. He's been very badly behaved.
DJ Tiddster opened his sunken eyes groggily.
Yo! Hey guys, what's up? What's the problem?
You're the problem, you fucking wastrel,
growled Barry.
Now clean up your act and finish arranging our garage band loops. We'll beat you so hard into the ground you'll have to be dug up with a JCB.
DJ Tiddster scrambled to his feet, pleading with the two men who loomed over him.
Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. It won't happen again.
He paused to think.
Hey, now, what's a JCB? I've never heard of that drug before.
Chet grabbed the man by his red hood.
Joseph Cyril Bamford. They make excavators. Not that you'd know about that sort of thing, you worthless gutter scum. You've never worked a day of graft in your life. Now get back in the booth, or we'll strike your credit off the album.
Chet sent the young man clattering back into the little room and slammed the soundproof door shut behind him. Barry exhaled and turned back to Milton.
Sorry you had to see that, Milts. At least now you'll understand some of the hard work that we put into our music.
Milton had already forgotten what he'd witnessed and was busy staring around at all the cool stuff everywhere. Framed gold and platinum pressings of all his favourite baked potato singles adorned the walls, alongside the band's signature instruments. The original drum kit with the big drawing of a potato on it. Keyboardist Freddie Stobart's legendary synth. Guitarist Nick Nass's collection of vegetable-themed plectrums. Chet's 10-string bass. And Barry's own custom guitar. A mythical beige Gibson, painted to look like the texture of a potato and rumoured to contain the original baked potato that was discovered in Chet's oven many decades ago and had led to the band's creation. Although he would never let anyone near the thing, it is said that the very same potato, now hard and withered and black, was fitted into the inner workings of the instrument and helps create the harsh, gritty tones that the band is known for. It was nicknamed simply Potassium.
This place is wicked!
Grinned Milton.
Yep,
responded Barry.
There's a lot going on here right now. As we said, we're recording new music. A studio album, actually. It probably won't come out for a bloody long time. I should say around 4 years. But it's going to be great. You'll love it. We'll even send you a free copy if you keep advertising our music on your YouTube channel.
Milton nodded excitedly. He had agreed to becoming Barry and Chet's PR man a couple of years back, leaving baked potato CDs in bus stations and in people's back gardens. But when Barry found out about the Milton Craft channel, he had shown great interest in having their music uploaded, so Milton had obliged, making Craig upload many of their classic songs, such as Cock and Balls, I Don't Like to Drink, and I'm a White Man with a Black Man's Penis, the latter of which was globally banned from radio play and nearly got Craig arrested just for uploading it. Barry grabbed Potassium off the wall.
Right, what time is it?
He checked the studio clock.
8:10. Fuck. Well, I guess we've got until 10 if we count the time that shit support band will take to finish.
Chet grabbed his bass off its stand.
What, Pornhawk? Yeah, they're notorious for going over time. Fucking gypsy bastards.
Guys, what about the great evil in the mine?
Asked Milton.
Aren't you going to bring any weapons of mass destruction?
Music is our weapon, Milts.
Responded Barry.
But we do have this. A present for you.
Barry nodded to Chet, who removed a long titanium baseball bat from a hidden nook behind the recording booth. Chet handed the bat to Barry, who handed it to Milton with open palms.
This is Lucinda the Bat. We use her to defend the silo from hooligan fans or wild animals. You may use her for this mission. Take good care of her.
Milton accepted the bat, which was well used, with a red pattern printed onto it that could in fact be blood.
Are you sure about this? Don't you have any guns or swords?
Chet shook his head.
Give Lucinda a go, Milts. You won't go back. There's nothing like bludgeoning a man's skull in.
Milton nodded, gripping the bat and giving it a few swings. He'd left his bayonet at home anyway, so he didn't really have a choice.
Okay, I'll use it.
Barry clapped his hands.
Right then, let's get to the mine.
Barry and Chet got the rest of the band gear together and loaded it into the Skoda, locking DJ Tiddster in the silo to continue producing beats. Barry bid So Young farewell, and he and Chet and Milton drove off for Maltby Main Colliery, which wasn't too far away, being roughly equidistant between Rancho del Podmore and Scunthorpe city centre. While they drove, Barry and Chet broke out into an anthem of war, stirring up feelings of courage and bravery in Milton's heart.
The boys are going to battle.
The boys are going to war.
Grab your shields.
Grab your spears.
What are you fighting for?
The boys are having a fight.
The boys are having a brawl.
When we're done,
we will have won. The boys are having a ball.
As the anthem wrapped up, the Skoda arrived at the edge of the great coal mine. They exited the vehicle and walked up to the great barbed wire fence that surrounded the huge black pits. Signs affixed to it read, "Keep out, no entry, and trespassers will be shot on sight." Milton gulped.
Where's the entrance?
I'm not going that way,
declared Barry.
I don't want to get my face smashed in with coal again. We'll sneak over top. A surprise commando attack.
Barry leapt at the fence and started to climb it, avoiding the sharp wire and jagged spikes of shrapnel with surprising agility for such a stout man. Chet likewise did the same, giving Barry a foot up over the last layer of barbs.
I can't get over that. I'll fall and impale myself.
Milton's words echoed around in his head as the memories of his beautiful girlfriend Minnie meeting her demise the same way replayed in his mind. He felt a tear brewing in the corner of his eye.
Shut the fuck up, Milton,
Growled Chet, hanging halfway over the top of the fence.
Grab my hand. Don't be a pansy.
Milton wiped away the tear before it could form and jumped up, grabbing Chet's hand and heaving himself upwards. In seconds he was over the fence and had landed with a crunch on the great black sediment sea that stretched out in all directions.
Cool. So much of the bloody stuff.
Said Barry, looking out over the endless heaps.
Probably enough to light a hearth for 1,000,000 billion years.
He rubbed his hands together.
Right, let's get to it. Milton, can you remember where to go? 'Cause I bloody can't.
Milton assessed the surroundings.
Right, so I think the accident happened in one of the central pits down the main boring shaft. But I don't know where that is.
Milton felt the bird vibrate in his pocket, as if pulling him forward. So Jamie's suspicions had been correct. There was some kind of evil Kragian energy right here in Scunthorpe. Potentially even a demon.
This way,
Announced Milton, pointing forward and marching off with Barry and Chet close behind, their instruments strapped to their backs. After about 20 minutes of trudging over uninterrupted piles of fossil fuels, the three came to a sudden drop, a great plunge down into a seemingly bottomless chasm of black rock. Milton remembered this location well, for this was the very spot where Minnie had perished all those years ago. Somewhere down there under all that rock was her beautiful skeleton. Milton felt a hand on his shoulder.
This must be hard for you, Milton,
said Barry.
It's hard for me, and all I did was dump a dead body here.
Milton puffed up his chest.
I can do this.
He marched forward with the two men following him. They made their way along a narrow ledge that wrapped around the pit in a spiral, winding down towards the dark hole. As they walked further and further down, the light got less and less until it was as dark as night. Chet whipped out a flashlight and pointed it around. They had reached the very bottom of the pit, which branched off into a narrow tunnel that looked like it had been burrowed frantically by a giant animal, not in keeping with the rest of the excavation at all.
What the fuck is that?
Asked Chet, pointing into the dark hole. The coal looked to be held up by absolutely nothing, completely defying gravity. Barry shook his head nervously.
I told you, something bad is going on here.
Bullshit! It's probably just a trick of the light.
Scoffed Chet. No sooner had Chet spoke than a fist-sized lump of coal flew out and knocked the flashlight clean out of his hand. They fumbled in the dark momentarily. Then Milton heard a strange, distant noise.
Shh! Wait. Do you hear that?
They paused to listen and heard a quick, repetitive chanting coming from the mouth of the coal cave. Chet turned the light on, illuminating Barry's petrified expression.
Whoa, what the fuck was that?
Milton walked to the hole, feeling the gentle pull of the bird in his pocket.
I don't know. But we need to go deeper.
Milton stepped forward, holding Lucinda the bat for protection, but Chet and Barry showed no signs of movement.
What is it, guys?
Asked Milton. Barry looked around nervously.
I think you'd better go in alone, Milton. We'll protect the outside. Make sure nothing escapes or gets in.
Milton rolled his eyes.
For goodness sake, Uncle Barry, it's only a bit of floating coal.
Don't act like that's a normal thing.
Yelled Barry.
It's not natural.
Fine,
said Milton.
then I'm going to go by myself.
He turned and walked off into the hole alone, and kept walking until he could no longer see even a glimpse of Chet's torchlight.
Right, bird, let's get some light in here.
The bird vibrated in his pocket and swooped out, casting a circle of incredibly bright light around itself.
That's more like it.
Grinned Milton. He could now make out that the tunnel's walls and ceiling were indeed entirely comprised of coal. He touched the wall. It seemed to be fixed in place by very strong glue, or perhaps even magic. Likely the same power that was sending floating coal around the place. He walked further down the hole, and the chanting became clearer. Milton could now make out what was being said in a hushed, frantic voice, with a distinct Scottish lilt.
98,462. 98,463.
It was someone counting. Milton proceeded cautiously, with his baseball bat held forth, following the meticulous muttering. After a few metres, the passage widened out into a spherical hollow, in the centre of which was a pale, atrophied man with the biggest head Milton had ever laid eyes upon, about the same circumference as a bouncy space hopper. Milton could identify that colossal veiny cranium anywhere. This was undoubtedly Paul the Head Cooper, his deceased lover's father, back from the dead with an even bigger head, heavily scarred and bruised from their previous encounter. Paul sat cross-legged, floating about 3 feet off the ground, with his eyes closed. He wore a few rags that were once clothes and nothing else, exposing his sallow, anemic flesh and unusually large feet. From his thin, crusted lips came the repetitious counting, which seemed to correlate with lumps of coal that he sent flying from the pile beneath him with telekinetic force.
98,464. 98,465.
Milton cleared his throat.
Paul?
The man's eyes snapped open, big, black and beady, just as Milton remembered them. A grin spread slowly across his face.
Milton Oliver. I've been expecting you.
Milton took a step down into the giant pile of coal.
What are you doing back alive, Paul? We killed you years ago.
The giant-headed man smiled.
I've been down here in my mine, of course, waiting for you no less. I used my powers to get the attention of that big fat idiot Barry Podmore, for I knew he would lead you here.
Milton brandished Lucinda the Bat.
Well, I'm here now. So say your piece before I smash your gigantic ugly head in again.
Paul Cooper grinned.
You're not looking so good yourself, Milton. I never thought you were handsome enough for my beautiful Minnie. But now look at you, all covered in disgusting yellow spots.
Milton pulled the hood over his face.
Shut up! You were no father to Minnie, just a puffed up windbag with a big 3D head.
With these words, Paul became enraged and let out a piercing whistle that dislodged a cluster of coal from the walls and sent them rushing towards Milton, who blocked the attack with his bat, making a series of quick dinking noises.
You have wasted your pathetic life, Milton. But I have used mine to perfect the art of seismic sonic psychokinesis.
He sent another barrage of coal at Milton, and a hint of green flashed in his eyes.
I can manipulate the airwaves with my voice and send things flying wherever I want.
Milton dodged the flying rocks.
I always knew you were a freak, Paul. What business do you have down here?
Paul's eyes returned to normal, and a sudden wash of melancholy swept over him.
I'm searching for my sweet Minnie. She's down here somewhere. It's been so long, but I know I'm close.
Milton jumped aside, avoiding a geyser of hot coal that erupted suddenly from underneath him.
You're crazy, man!
Paul cackled madly.
Oh, I'm no man. Have you not even questioned how I survived you slicing my neck? I'm a headloid from the grey caves of my distant homeworld of Whack. Yes, it seems a whole lifetime ago now that I left.
Milton batted a lump of coal that ricocheted off of Paul's giant head.
You're an alien? Of course! With a head that big, you'd have to be.
Paul sneered.
This is but a fraction of the size my people's heads can become. You see nothing.
Okay, whatever,
said Milton.
Why was I drawn to you then, huh? Do you work for Krog?
Paul paused, closing his eyes as if to remember.
Krog. Yes, I remember that name. I was indeed one of his agents in a time long since past. I was sent to Earth by him as a surveyor, collecting knowledge on this planet's inhabitants, as my people were often tasked with doing. But my ship crashed, and I was stranded, with no way to contact the rest of my platoon.
Paul continued to rub his temples, and the hail fire of coal subsided.
Back then my head was small for a headloid, and I kind of felt a connection to you humans with your tiny heads. After I intercepted your economy as a leader of this very colliery, I fell in love with a beautiful woman.
Maxie Cooper,
deduced Milton.
Minnie's mother.
Paul smiled, recounting warm memories.
Ah, Maxie. I saw something in her that I didn't see in anybody else. She accepted me for who I was. Made me feel human.
Cut to the chase, Paul. Are you one of the frightful 55 or not?
Barked Milton. Paul stroked his chin.
The frightful 55. I've not heard that for many a year. Yes, I think I was known as Testac to Secretary's Holly Horrylosithon.
Paul opened his eyes as if everything had suddenly come back to him.
I was one of Crag's most loyal, commander of an entire legion of headloids.
He turned to Milton, his eyes flashing green.
And you have become the bearer of the chalice. You are here to kill me.
Paul surged forward, shifting from his cross-legged position and hovering above Milton in an attack stance. Milton held out his hand.
Hey, whoa. Let's talk about this like men, Paul.
Paul raised his spindly arms, and a ring of coal began to spin around his body.
I am sworn under oath to Crag to end your life.
What about Minnie?
Milton gesticulated wildly at the coal beneath them.
You've still got to find her. I'll bet she's just right under there.
Milton pointed behind Paul.
Shit, look! That's her nose peeking out right there.
Paul fell for the ruse and turned, giving Milton a window of opportunity. He leapt into the air and swung the metal bat, landing a hit directly on Paul's fat head. A dull thwack sounded as the bat made contact with Paul's thick skull, and he collapsed, his floating coal falling and burying him partially. Milton wasted no time and struck with his bat again, knocking an entire fragment of the alien's skull clean off. Paul's body writhed, and Milton went in for another swing, this time cleaving his entire globular head in twine. The demon that called itself Paul fell still. Milton wiped sweat from his forehead and removed the chalice from his backpack to absorb Paul's essence, which filled the little glass with its orange juice. Milton quaffed back the drink. Another demon vanquished. Scunthorpe was safe for now. Milton walked out of the mouth of the cave, swinging the bat around confidently.
Well, I put a stop to the evil. No thanks to you two.
Barry and Chet looked bemused.
What was in there?
Inquired Barry. Milton looked at his nails.
Nothing. Just Paul Cooper back from the dead with an even bigger head. Smashed it in with Lucinda. Easy work.
Barry and Chet looked at each other in disbelief, then broke out into an uproarious jeer of approval, congratulating Milton and slapping him on the back.
Well bloody done, Milton. That Glaswegian wanker should have known better than to try it on with us again,
said Barry proudly.
You're not the boy I once took under my wing anymore. You're a man. I mean, just look at those biceps. They're enough to make Hulk Hogan tremble.
Barry was indeed correct. Milton's arm muscles had swollen significantly since absorbing the essence, and could be seen bulging through his hoodie.
And your fuck-ugly zits have gone,
added Chet. Milton flexed his new bulky arms.
Well, what can I say? The whole cave of coal experience really changed me.
Milton could barely finish bragging before a strange cold feeling passed through him momentarily. Barry and Chet had evidently felt the same thing. Barry shivered.
Ugh, someone just walked over my grave.
A deep chill and a sudden sense of dread washed over Milton, and he gulped.
Behind you!
Exclaimed Chet.
There's something going into the cave.
Milton turned to see a dark shadow dart into the mouth of coal and out of sight.
Uh-oh, this is bad.
Milton gripped his bat and ran back into the cave. Barry called after him.
Milton, where are you going?
Milton didn't respond. He was already sprinting back through the tunnel of black rock. He knew all too well what this ominous shadowy being was, a foe he had encountered before in the Pucker realm, and one he wasn't going to run from this time. He came once more to Paul's coal cavern to find that it was empty, yet the air was filled with a heavy, shadowy presence. The corpse of Paul Cooper still lay half-covered in coal in the centre of the pit. A disembodied voice spoke to Milton.
"Oh, cowardly champion of the chalice. Finally we meet again."
Milton addressed the shadowy miasma around him.
It's you again, isn't it? The shadow with no body. Show yourself. Then I shall show you my newfound awesome powers.
"You have grown a lot since we last met,"
came the voice.
"You are no longer a weakling who runs from danger, but you are still no match for me."
A rumbling came from beneath, and the cold, dead hand of Paul the head Cooper twitched.
Not this again!
Cried Milton.
Why can't you get a real body and stop hijacking off dead people?
The coals fell away as the limp and battered corpse of Paul rose into the air, then suddenly jolted to life, encircled by a nebulous black shroud of energy. The shadowy voice spoke from Paul's bloody mouth.
"I need no mortal body, for none would be able to contain my power."
Well, don't use this one. I literally just killed this guy,
cried Milton, exacerbated. The shadowy being moved Paul's arm.
Yes, the demon known as Testactisectries Holy once an ally to my master.
Ha! Idiot,
laughed Milton.
You just revealed who you work for. Another one of Krog's little lackeys, are you? I'll strike you down and absorb you in an instant.
Fool! I am no lackey. I am the one known as Shadow Man, first prime agent to Krog. There is none more high-ranking than I, except the Demon Lord himself.
Goh! Shadow Man?
Scoffed Milton.
You can't actually be serious. What are you, gay anime supervillain from the 90s?
At this, the shadowy demon became infuriated.
It is a name I have had long before the 90s. Nay, long before your plane of existence was even created. Now, face me, or I shall disintegrate you where you stand and seize the chalice.
Milton leapt into combat, picking up sizable lumps of coal and batting them at Shadow Man, who deflected them with the same psionic telekinetic powers that Paul had used, appearing to have absorbed his powers as well as his physical form.
Once again, you were easy to track down,
spoke Shadow Man as he began to amass a giant ball of coals above his head.
I have followed you since you left the Pucker realm, carefully choosing the right time to strike.
Bullshit. I don't believe you. Where were you while I was in Sweden or Ed's Burger?
Waiting for the precise moment, which has now arrived.
Shadow Man sent the giant amalgam of coal hurtling towards Milton, far too big to be deflected by his bat alone. He was a goner. Milton braced for impact with his hands outstretched, but felt no contact. In fact, he had stopped the big ball of coal fast in its tracks, and had it held in place with his own freshly awakened telekinetic capabilities. Milton grinned.
Oh yeah! You're not the only one who can absorb powers!
Taking inspiration from the final phase of the Darth Maul boss fight in LEGO Star Wars 1, Milton sent the ball of coal straight back at Shadow Man, which crashed into him and clattered all about the place. The Shadow Demon, however, was unaffected.
You have indeed become a worthy adversary, but as I say, no match for my raw power!
Shadow Man Paul held his hands aloft, and another rumbling came from below. Milton watched in horror and disbelief as a second pale hand emerged from the coals below, the hand of his deceased girlfriend, Minnie Cooper. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't peel his eyes away as the decayed corpse was lifted from the rubble, a great rusty spike impaled through her stomach.
Poor Minnie. She truly didn't deserve to die the way she did.
The same black aura encompassed the corpse of Minnie, and Shadow Man became her, gaining control of her entire body, including her giant soot-covered feet that Milton had once worshipped so lovingly. A tear slid down his cheek.
No. Don't do this.
You cannot handle my power,
echoed the voice of Shadow Man as the deteriorated body of the black-haired girl became animated, pulling out the rusted rod and brandishing it. Now the corpses of both Paul and Minnie hovered over Milton, a double-attack throwback from the past. Milton wiped the tear away. This wasn't really his girlfriend. It was a sick and twisted projection of malice from an emotionless demon who would do anything to get into his head and defeat him. This was just another challenge to overcome.
Now you will be slain by your first enemy, and your first love.
Just as he had last time, Milton turned and fled. There was no shame in running, especially if you knew you had no chance. He'd rather be called a coward by some sad, formless dark spirit than be brutally killed by his undead ex-girlfriend. Milton sprinted back out of the cave as the cadavers pursued him, something that had been happening to him quite a lot recently.
Coward! You have not changed one bit, Milton.
Milton leapt from the entrance where Barry and Chet stood in alarm.
Milton, what the fuck is going on?
Cried Barry. Milton panted breathlessly.
He came back to life again.
Chet screamed in alarm as the two hovering corpses became visible at the end of the cave.
What the fuck? Again? Who's that zombie lass?
Milton turned and held out his hands.
It's my ex. Now get away. I'm going to hold them back!
A wave of psionic energy came from Milton's palms as he stopped the shadowy zombies from coming any further, freezing them in place with telekinesis. He knew he wouldn't be able to hold them off for long, but at least there weren't any more dead bodies nearby for Shadow Man to hop into. He was almost certain that Shadow Man could do him no harm unless he was possessing something. He called back to Barry and Chet.
Quick! Block off the entrance so they can't get out!
How the fuck do we do that?
Cried Chet in anguish.
I don't know. Improvise. Isn't that what you guys do?
Barry's eyes lit up and he grabbed potassium from his back.
Music, Chet. We'll play a song so loud the cave will collapse.
Milton smiled.
Yes! Perfect! Now be quick. I really can't hold them off any longer.
This was indeed the case. As Milton spoke, the shadowy corpses were moving ever closer, moaning and groaning as they resisted his field of force.
Wait! You don't have any amps or speakers! How are you going to make noise that loud?
Barry brandished his guitar.
You underestimate the power of baked potato. Hit it, Chet. 3, 2, 1. We will crush you. Crush you. Fat ugly head, bout to be dead. Once black coal are painted in red. We will crush you. Crush you. Psychic witches, weak little bitches, gonna need several billion stitches. We will crush you. Crush you. Wipe the floor clean, we're gonna get mean, just so you know we're not ripping off Queen. We will crush you.
Barry and Chet finished their song, which had been accompanied by the flat twanging of their instruments without electricity, but it didn't matter. The sheer frequency and volume of their combined vocals on the last line had caused the coal all around to shake and crumble, collapsing to block off the entrance to Paul's hole and trapping the Shadow Man-possessed Paul and Minnie behind it. Milton fell back, exhausted, as Barry and Chet high-fived.
That was huge,
declared Barry.
Easily the loudest we've ever sang,
remarked Chet. Milton got to his feet, trembling. He felt weak in the knees and really needed a drink of water.
How did you guys do that with no mics or anything?
Chet tapped his throat.
The wonders of the Thungalow, Milts. Does crazy things to a man's lungs.
Milton frowned and looked back to the avalanche of coals that was still tumbling around them.
Okay, but we've got to split this joint. It's gonna blow!
The three hurried up the spiral path out of the dark pit to see the last fading glimpses of light, a pale red sunset that poked out over the mounds of coal. Milton felt a slight cold breeze and looked up to see a faint wispy shadow rise into the sky. A thin voice resonated in Milton's head.
You have won this round, but next time I shall not go so easy on you.
Barry checked his pocket watch.
Fuck, it's 10:10. We're massively late for our gig. We've got to get to the Lincoln Imp stat.
Barry and Chet began marching off, but Milton called out to them.
Wait, guys!
He paused for a moment, wondering if what he was about to suggest was a good idea.
I have a way of getting around really fast.
Barry whipped around.
Faster than my Skoda? Impossible.
Milton continued, ignoring the painful buzzing from the bird in his pocket.
Yep, we just need to find a door.
After a few minutes of searching, the three came to a small corrugated iron shed, once used to shield miners from great excavatory blasts.
This'll do nicely,
said Milton, cracking his knuckles.
Right, this won't take a second.
Completely ignoring his father's advice, Milton approached the worn metal door and thwacked his head against it, concentrating really hard on wanting to go to the Lincoln Imp.
What fucking gypsy voodoo bullshit is this?
Said Chet, his arms folded.
You have to go through the door. When you come out, you'll be backstage at the venue,
professed Milton.
No way.
Barry touched at the door in bewilderment.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the craziest thing I've seen today.
Milton stood back.
Go for it, Uncle Barry. Step right on through.
Barry looked to Chet, who rolled his eyes. Then he opened the door cautiously, stepping through and closing it behind him. For a moment there was silence. Then a piercing howl came from inside the little shed.
What the fuck? What have you done to me?
Barry Podmore burst out of the shed in terror. Instead of his usual slick-back, receding silver-grey hair, he had long blonde locks that fell about his shoulders in curls. His eyelashes were long and black, and his usually thin, pursed lips had become full and rosy red.
What's happened to me?
He wailed, clutching at his once manly chest, which now featured a big pair of pendulous bosoms, fit to burst through his cheap flannel shirt.
I'm a woman!
Milton panicked as Barry fell to his knees in woe, all while Chet guffawed uncontrollably.
I don't know what's happened. Something must have gone wrong.
Sweated Milton.
Turn me back! Turn me back!
Sobbed Barry.
I need to be a man! I can't play like this! I'll be laughed off stage!
Before Milton could do anything, the bird swooped from his pocket and created a blinding white flash of light. When he could see again, he saw that Barry and Chet were frozen in place, with Chet rolling on the floor laughing, and Barry a long-haired mess in a heap on the ground. The bird hovered in front of Milton.
Right, Milton, I'm absolutely fuming now. You didn't listen to me again.
Came the voice of Jamie Oliver, pitch shifted as it was relayed through the little familiar.
I said don't use space transmutation, and you've only gone and used it.
But Dad, I killed a demon and absorbed it. My yellow notes went away. I thought I could use it again.
Protested Milton.
No.
Came Jamie's voice.
It was too soon. I said take normal transport, didn't I?
Oh, but it's so much effort.
Moaned Milton.
You could have got into some real trouble there. Thank goodness it wasn't any worse. Barry could have turned into a giant angry monster or a hurricane or something.
Well, how do I turn him back to normal?
Inquired Milton. The bird fluttered in place.
When I unfreeze time, he should become a man again. Bit of a shame, really. Those are some great big tracts of land. Anyway, yeah, you said too much to these two, so I'm gonna have to wipe their memories as well.
Milton looked at the coal under his feet glumly.
Okay, fine.
Other than that, good job with the demon. We'll talk more about what happened when you get home. Oh yeah, and I'm gonna call you an Uber so you can throw away those train tickets. I need you back here as soon as possible.
Milton was puzzled.
An Uber? Won't that be expensive for that big of a journey?
No, don't be silly, Milton. It's a magic Uber. It goes 2.5 times as fast and costs a fraction of a normal Uber. The drivers are all really nice. This guy I've booked is called Matt Pulborough, and I use him all the time. He's great.
Matt Pulborough? This sounds dodgy if you ask me.
It's not dodgy, it's totally safe. Now, I'm gonna unfreeze time. I'll see you back at home.
Everything flashed white again, and Milton rubbed his eyes. Barry and Chet were in the same place, but Barry was no longer a woman and was back to his usual hyper-masculine self. The two men got to their feet dizzily.
Whoa, holy shit! My head kills!
Groaned Barry.
Where the fuck are we?
Chet looked around groggily.
We're at the abandoned colliery. We must have gotten wasted.
Barry turned to Milton.
Mills, what's happened? Last thing I remember, we were all sinking cram at the anchor.
Milton went along with what had already been set up for him.
We came here to check out that evil presence, but it turned out just to be a bunch of local kids throwing coal after all. You guys got so drunk you blacked out.
Chet shook his head.
Fucking Jippo louts. I knew it.
I could have sworn there was something spooky going on,
said Barry.
Well. Probably shouldn't have eaten that entire plate of bacon in the morning.
I fucking knew it,
cried Chet.
You had been eating bacon.
Barry flipped Chet off and checked his pocket watch.
Holy shit, it's 14 minutes past 10. We're massively late for our gig.
You guys have got to get to the Lincoln Imp stat,
added Milton.
Let's get back to the Skoda and get out of here.
Barry and Chet agreed, and they jogged out through the main gates of the mine, while Milton filled in their blanks with ill-thought-out lies. They walked the perimeter of the great fence until at last the Skoda was in sight, its bullet-grey body reflecting the very last trickles of sunlight. Barry and Chet piled in, eager to leave and play their set, but Milton stood waiting on the curbside.
What's the problem, Milts? Don't you want to sit in the back seat?
Asked Barry, starting up the engine with a roar.
No, it's not that,
replied Milton wistfully.
I just don't think I can come with you.
Why ever not?
Inquired Chet, pulling out more cans of lager from the glove box.
My dad wants me home.
Barry groaned in disapproval.
Oh, come on. That fat fuck can see you all year round. Come and see Baked Potato live. We'll give you a lift back afterwards.
Milton thought about it, then smiled.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure he won't mind.
Milton walked to open the back door, but a huge electric shock came from his leg pocket, flooring him instantly.
Whoa, you okay there, pal?
Asked Chet. Milton winced.
Yeah. I'm alright.
He got up. Evidently his father did not want him getting in the Skoda. He looked up the country road to his left to see a black car driving towards him. That would likely be Matt Pulborough in his magic Uber.
I just can't come with you.
Barry snorted.
Alright, fine. Keep your secrets. You can see a baked potato alive another time, but it won't be as good as tonight.
I'm sure it won't,
agreed Milton solemnly. Barry continued.
Okay, well, take care, Milts. You can keep Lucinda the Bat. She'll serve you well. Don't spend all your pocket money in one place, and I'll send another care package next month if you keep promoting our music on your YouTube.
Chet nodded courteously.
Goodbye, Milts.
Milton waved as the bullet-grey vehicle pulled out into the road and screeched off. As it did, Barry and Chet's singing could be heard far off into the distance.
So long, Milton, we've had a blast. The lovely day has gone so fast. Flying coal was just a ruse. Now in car forever we cruise.
Milton stopped waving and turned around. He'd said goodbye to his uncle, and now it was time to say goodbye to Scunthorpe, with its lovely factories and green fields. The ominous black car pulled up to the curb where Milton stood. It had no number plate, but appeared to be a well-kept Nissan Qashqai. Milton attempted to get a look at the driver through the darkened windshield. He appeared to be bald and bearded, wearing sunglasses and a pair of leather driving gloves. The driver, known as Matt, indicated for Milton to get in with a small hand movement, and Milton obeyed, opening up the door to the passenger seat. The interior was fairly clean and fresh-smelling, thanks to a cluster of air fresheners that hung under the rear-view mirror, many of which were in colours that Milton had never seen before.
So, busy day?
Asked Milton awkwardly. Matt Pulborough offered no reply and engaged the engine. The car pulled off slowly and smoothly, in stark contrast to Barry's rampant driving. The journey was passed in total silence, with Milton looking out of the window. Matt didn't speak even once, and had Milton questioning if he even could at all. Maybe he was an alien with no vocal cords. After staring at the rolling green of the passing Scunthorpe countryside, Milton eventually felt himself nodding off, put to sleep by the gentle rocking of the Uber as it passed over the uneven Scunthorpian roads. When he awoke, he was outside his home in Bristol. It appeared to be very early in the morning, and the first light of dawn peeked over the Bristol skyline. Clearly, magic Ubers weren't as fast as his father had made out. Jamie Oliver opened the front door and came out to greet Milton in the car, wearing slippers and a dressing gown.
Well, well, here he is. Big journey, eh?
Milton spoke drowsily.
I killed poor Cooper twice in a row and saw my dead girlfriend come back to life.
Jamie laughed, helping Milton from the vehicle. He produced a see-through plastic bag of nondescript meats and passed them across the passenger seat to Matt, who accepted them politely and offered a smile and a nod.
Cheers, Matt. See you around, mate.
The black car honked its horn and drove off down the road. Milton shuffled through the front door with Jamie following him.
You're looking well. No yellow spots anymore, eh? And bloody hell, I don't remember you looking that buff. Must be the chalice, eh? Told you it would give you cool powers.
Milton ignored his father and made for the kitchen, where he took a long drink of water from the tap, letting Lucinda the Bat clatter to the floor. He drank long and hard, then wiped his mouth. Next to him on the sink was the remains of his meal from the previous morning, the half-eaten Mountainese monkey omelette. Milton stared at it for a while, then spoke.
Tell me about Shadow Man.
Jamie leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping a mug of hot Ovaltine.
Yeah, I've been looking into him for a while now. Nasty one he is. He's basically Krog's lieutenant, but we never knew about him. Very powerful, and he can get all up inside dead bodies.
Jamie removed a slip of lined paper from his pocket.
Here we go. Hugh compiled a new list of demons for you. Turns out it's actually the Frightfield 56, now that we've added this Shadow Man. I crossed out that Headlord guy, Testas Testicles or whatever here. He was number 34 on the list. You can throw away the old one.
Milton accepted the paper begrudgingly.
Surely there's a better way of doing this than a paper list.
Jamie shook his head.
No, there isn't. Right, I'm going back to bed. We'll talk more in the morning.
Milton graced his father with no answer and walked across the kitchen to the stairs. As he did so, he saw something standing at the top that made him freeze in place. A small girl, no older than 10, with skin of Hispanic colour and long curly blonde hair, stood in pyjamas, clutching a stuffed plush elephant, looking in fright down at him. Jamie came up behind Milton.
Oh yeah, Milton, I'd like you to meet your sister.
This episode of Milton's Adventure, read to you by Ted Pawncroft, was sponsored by the Claudeluca Winery in Paris. I've actually got a bottle of Montmichel 1958 here, from the cellars of the Claudeluca Winery. It's almost as old as me. Let's get the cork out. Try a little sip. It's very good wine. It's very, very good wine. Very, got a lot of depth to it. It packs a... Try it a bit more. Try it a bit more. It's very good wine. Very good wine. Just send me another bottle of that. Yes, so, that was the sponsor of this episode. The Claudeluca Winery in Paris. Tune in next time for another episode of Milton's Adventure, and I can't wait to see you there. Goodbye.